What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Pioneer video, and we're going to be going off the beaten path here a little bit. While we're used to seeing kind of the Amalia combos, the Lotus Fields, the Vampires, and the Blue-Red Phoenixes of the world, this deck has been popping up in usage quite a bit, honestly, and it's got a few tools that attack the metagame in a pretty favorable way, considering everything that is going on, and of course, you know, is something that I think is overvalued by a lot of like newer players and kind of undervalued by some of the veterans of the game stuff. And of course, things we're going to talk about as we talk about mono black discard for the Pioneer format. But of course, before we get too deep into the deck and talk about the nitty gritty, please consider subscribing to the channel and ring the notification bell so you know when future videos get posted. We do a lot of modern and Pioneer based content here on the channel, as well as checking out the Discord server, which will be linked down in the description below, along with the deck list as well if you want to try it out yourself. So mono black discard is kind of reminiscent of like the modern versions of like 8-rack. While there is technically a legal rack card in the format, it doesn't really see play, and instead this deck tends to lean more towards, you know, getting value from discarding your opponent's cards and things like that, and trying to basically put them under an immense amount of pressure with it. So of course, we see Liliana the Veil, a card that we've talked about not really seeing a whole lot of play, you know, maybe some sideboard usage, and here featured pretty prominently being a 3 of in this deck, you know, with the +1, each player discarding a card, getting to target a player with its -2 to sacrifice a creature, and then a -6 that doesn't necessarily end the game, but it kind of fits into the theme of what mono black discard is trying to do, and that is separating all your permanents, all permanents target player controls into 2 piles. That player sacrifices all permanents in the pile of their choice. So this is like a way that if you can make some pretty good piles of Liliana the Veil, it virtually ends the game without your opponent knowing that it ends the game. Where you can kind of like color screw them in some places, you can force them to, you know, sacrifice a bunch of lands to keep a permanent in play that you can easily have an answer for, and just basically set them back like way far, you know. And you know, it's kind of a skill to make piles of Liliana, and it's a skill to kind of play with this card. So the fact that it's been a beloved modern, you know, former modern staple for a while, you know, and really hadn't made too many waves in Pioneer, but I'm glad to see that she has kind of found a home in this kind of like niche deck that's starting to kind of pop up and seemingly do a pretty good job at tackling the Vampires, Phoenix, Amalia metagame. Alongside her is Shieldred the Apocalypse, the card that is always been very powerful, really, since it's been printed. Underwhelming in preview season, and has absolutely dominated ever since in a multiple format. But when your opponent has no cards in hand and they need to have an answer to the Shieldred, and they're essentially drawing 1 card a turn, and sometimes not even really getting to hold on to that card, it makes it pretty hard to deal with Shieldred and could take multiple draw steps to potentially even find an answer. And of course, your opponent's answering Shieldred, they're not answering the other threats in the deck, like Aklazot's the Deepest Betrayal. 5 mana 4/4 flying lifelink. Whenever it attacks, each opponent discards a card, and for each opponent it can't, you draw a card. So this is going to get you some card advantage, you know, towards the later stages of the game, where your opponent is kind of having to play their spells to not die to the board, but then you're also attacking with Aklazot's, getting yourself, you know, dealing 4 damage, gaining 4 life, ideally, and then even forcing your opponent to discard the card in their hand that maybe they can't cast, and if, of course, they're hellbent, then you just get to start drawing cards. Whenever your opponent discards a land card, you make a 1/1 bat creature token with flying. When it dies, you return to the battlefield, tap, transform on its own control, which it'll end up tapped as like a land, and then you can transform this by paying a black and 2, or paying 2 generic and a black and tapping it to transform it if your opponent has 1 or fewer cards in hand, and you can only activate it as a sorcery. So definitely an annoying card to have to deal with, because your opponent, even if they remove it, especially like in the later stages of the game, they're going to be able to remove it. It's going to come back and play tapped on your turn, but chances are they're not going to have enough card advantage to actually get back up, you know, past having 1 card in hand. So you're going to be able to, on your next turn, flip this and, you know, continue to pressure your opponent. The other spells, so those are like some of your big threats. You know, we see Liliana as like a way to kind of forward this game plan and making your opponent discard cards. We have Aklazot's and Shieldred to kind of put pressure on your opponent from that point. And even Aklazot's being able to, you know, get cards out of your opponent's hand as well. Another like way that we can abuse discarding cards is this card Wast Knot. Originally came out, I believe it was M15. I think it was a community design card, at least art-wise, I believe. And Wast Knot says that whenever an opponent discards a card, so if it's a creature card, you make a 2/2 zombie. If it's a land, you add 2 black mana. And whenever it's a non-creature, non-land card, you get to draw a card. So if your opponent discards enchantment, instant sorcery, so on, you're going to get to draw a card. If your opponent discards land, you get black mana. And if they discard their creatures, you get zombies. So this is like another way that you can, play this discard strategy, and you play like Wast Knot on turn 2, and then you follow it up with something like a Go Blank, where your opponent's going to discard 2 cards, and then you're going to exile all cards from that player's graveyard. You can potentially end up getting a burst of mana if they decide to discard lands. You end up getting some creatures out of the deal. Of course, with something like Amalia, with Lotus Field, those cards, and even the Blue-Red Phoenix deck above all of them, in some way or another want to use their graveyard. So like Go Blank is just kind of a neat like main deck card that fits into your game plan, and then also has another bonus mode of just exiling that player's graveyard. So a very good card, in that right scenario, especially when you're able to follow it up with, you have like turn 1 Thoughtseize into Wast Knot into Go Blank. And speaking of like Thoughtseize and Duress are ways that you can kind of trigger, some parts of it. I mean, Duress is really only probably going to draw you a card, but getting an instant sorcery, enchantment, whatever, out of your opponent's hand, drawing a card is pretty nice. And then Thoughtseize, kind of getting the choice between, drawing a card and making a creature. If, whatever situation matters, of course, just on top of taking like their best card. You see Bitter Triumph here is going to cost you to discard a card or pay 3 life. You destroy a creature or planeswalker. Again, this is going to kind of help you push through some of your other creatures. You have Shieldred's Edict as additional removal. Extinction Event, which is also kind of like this mass like board wipe that you can kind of protect your things while also getting rid of your opponent's things, which is really nice. Cling to Dust is essentially like a mana sink for this deck. You can exile a card from a graveyard. If it was a creature card, you gain 3 life. Otherwise, you get to draw a card. So in a way, like you can pay 1 mana, get rid of something out of your opponent's graveyard, draw a card, and then you can escape it by paying a 3 generic and a black and exiling 5 other cards from your graveyard to then just start kind of hitting your opponent's graveyard, you can draw a card, so on. Lastly, we have Reckoner Bankbuster, which is like a way that you can get a little bit of card advantage, and of course, eventually you get like a 1/1 creature token that can end up crewing the Reckoner Bankbuster and attacking that way. But this is like a way that you can get some card advantage, potentially look for, things like Go Blanks and Wast Knots and your Shieldred's Aquazoth and so on. In the land base, we have 26 lands in our, essentially in our Mono Black deck. We have 2 Demolition Field, 4 Field of Ruin. These colorless lands are going to blow up non-basic lands, and then you're going to allow you and your opponent to search for basic lands. Playing 8 swamps in the deck, so chances are you're never really going to run out. So you can just kind of blow up your opponent's lands. Eventually, they're going to run out of basic lands, and you're going to be able to just kind of have like Stone Rains and stuff like that with Field of Ruin and Demolition Field, and you're going to be able to get lands, your opponent's not going to be able to get lands, and it's going to make it a lot harder for them to cast spells, so it's going to be a lot easier to force them to discard a bunch of cards if they're unable to actually cast their spells. You have Gyreach Sanitarium, which is going to make each player draw a card and then discard a card. It's going to help us trigger our Shieldreds from our opponent's drawing cards. We're going to gain life and they're going to lose life. And then we're also going to see, with like Aquazoths, like if your opponent discards a land, you're going to make 1/1s. Wast Knot's going to end up generating, a zombie, a card, or mana. Just kind of a good utility land to play in this deck. You have Hive the Eye Tyrant that can eat cards out of the graveyard and put a clock on your opponent. Sunken Citadel is kind of a new card that people have been playing quite a bit recently in like these, Field of Ruin / Demolition Field decks, where you can choose a color. You can add 1 mana of the chosen color or 2 mana of the chosen color, and you can spend this mana to activate the abilities of land sources. So Sunken Citadel can, make it cheaper to activate Hive of the Eye Tyrant. Notably, with it adding 2 mana to activate lands, you can then activate Field of Ruin and Demolition Field essentially off of 1 land, which is, a lot better than having to spend multiple mana, because then it kind of saves you 1 mana to be able to cast like maybe something like a Wast Knot or a Shieldred's Edict or so on. You have Urborg to turn all your lands into swamps. Sideboard, you got more Duresses. Now you have Dust Shadow for the Amalia matchups. You have Reckoner Bankbuster. Unlicensed Hearse for more of the graveyard decks. Ashiok, another pretty good card. I mean, stopping your opponent from being able to search their libraries. So spells or abilities your opponents control can't cause their controller to search the libraries. So, if they try to Field of Ruin you or whatever, like, they're not going to be able to search, but you will get to. And Ashiok also just getting to mill cards and then exile the graveyard. Heck, you can even mill yourself if you really deem it necessary. And you still get to exile your opponent's graveyards. This is going to be pretty good, again, like further into the Amalia matchups and for the other graveyard-based decks in the format. Necromentia is just like a good hate card in the sideboard. Path of Peril for the Boros Convoke deck. Kalidas, just another like very grindy mid-range card, and then of course another Extinction Event in the board as well. And that is the mono black discard deck for Pioneer. So it does a very good job of being able to play like early Duresses and Thoughtseizes and things like that to kind of disrupt your opponent in the early game. Once you get Liliana going and your opponent wants to go play a land and then like play a spell, and then Liliana is also knocking a card out of their hand, eventually they're going to run out of cards, and like with Liliana and like all the other removal spells, you're going to be able to get rid of maybe what threats they end up getting to play. You even have some options of getting rid of their graveyard and Go Blink in the main deck, and even like Cling to Dust and things like that you're going to be able to have something for the Phoenix matchups. You're going to have something for the Amalia matchups. You're going to have something for the Rakdos Vampires, where if they're not able to get to the board, very quickly, if they're not able to get to like turn 3 Vein Ripper or whatever, like, you're going to be in decent shape nonetheless, and just kind of put your opponent in this bind of where they're going to need to draw very specific cards in a very specific order to actually be able to win the game. And you can even cut off some of those outs by continuously demolition fielding them, and then Field of Ruining them, as well as just getting to put pressure on them through Aclazots and Shieldreds, and even getting to Liliana Ultimate as well is going to make life very hard for your opponent. So definitely, while I think the in theory is a lot better than the in practice, I can't deny with the result of getting first place in last weekend's Pioneer Challenge. So, maybe this deck has some legs to stand on. Of course, we're going to have to see how it plays out as we kind of get closer and closer to RCQ season, and we start getting some of the more like in-person, like paper RCQ results, over some of the just Pioneer challenges and then prelims and things like that. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. If Mono Black Discard can be a viable player in the Pioneer format, I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions, things like that. And of course, if there's any other Pioneer decks you would like to see me go over, I would like those suggestions as well. Again, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you know when future videos get posted. And check out the deck list and the Discord, all linked in the description down below. And that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next one.